time for the big number. %19. That's the percentage of giving attributed to foundations according to Giving USA. That's increased 3.4% over 2020, with more and more grant money flowing into communities across the United States. Within the world of foundations, there's a broad spectrum of how and why foundations exist. That number by Giving USA includes government grants, community foundations, as well as private foundations. The nuance here is that service fees paid by the government aren't necessarily counted in that, but there's still a fair amount of federal, state, and local giving that operates in a very different way than community foundations and private foundations. It's also fascinating to see how much of the zeitgeist around the perception of the nonprofit sector is driven by foundation giving. On television or movies, formal philanthropy will likely be represented through the lens of a foundation. Maya Rudolph portrays a Mackenzie Scott-like figure in the show Loot, where she gets pulled into the day-to-day workings of a foundation she didn't even know existed under her name. Let's take a look at a clip and drop.
Hello?
Molly Novak. I'm the executive director of your foundation.
Wait, what?
I was wondering if you wouldn't mind coming into the office tomorrow.
I have an office?
I thought the show was pretty funny. Drop in the comments if you've actually checked it out. The passionate debates about financial allocations of the fictional Wayne Foundation also are flooding Reddit, which is where a rich billionaire is beating up mentally ill people in the streets of Gotham. This is what people think about when they think about nonprofits sometimes. Foundations lay at the origin of both the sector itself, with some of the most interesting or influential innovations in giving coming from foundations, such as donor advice funds and community giving days. It's also interesting that even the origination of the critiques of our sector come from people that worked at foundations as opposed to in individual giving. Folks include Edgar Villanueva and Voulet as an example. But today, I actually don't want to focus too much on foundation giving itself. We're going to hear from Shalia Phillips. We're going to talk a lot more about that. She knows way more about that than me. What I actually want to focus on is the foundations of support that we need now in the sector. Much of this is rooted in how people join the nonprofit sector, where the skewed perception of foundation dollars impact can sometimes have disastrous results for new professionals given unrealistic goals and priorities. For me, much of my ability to merge the worlds of foundation and individual giving are connected to my first job in the nonprofit sector. Now, before I get into that, I'd actually want to hear about your origins. What year did you join the nonprofit sector, and drop in what maybe your first job was? I'll pause for that. Check the comments. I know we got Kathleen in there. She's part of the, she's going to go on the wheel because she asked a question. So that counts.
Yeah, Tim, I know you're going to share your experience here in just a moment, but we do want to encourage everyone who's watching live to jump in the comments. This is a really great prize that we're giving away for this episode 9. It's so great that we're going to be able to give that away right at the very end of the show. So don't hesitate. And you've seen, Tim, I've been able to put everybody's comments on the screen here. Kathleen,
pull Kathleen's up. We got that. So she joined in 2016 as a volunteer. That's cool.
Kathleen, this is what the prize wheel looks like right now. It is Kathleen, and I'm going to add Kiana's name to that wheel.
See, right there we go. There we go. We got it going. We're greasing the wheel.
So, Tim, take it away.
Awesome. See, that and that's actually really interesting, seeing both volunteers and then more dedicated jobs like capacity building and development coordinators. For me, I thought I was actually going to be an academic, specifically a labor historian. My entire life track was organized around this goal. So when I received the second round of rejection letters from the collection of schools that I applied to get a PhD at, many of which were in the Midwest, and why I was living in Chicago, I actually lost my sense of self. My father ended up flying to Chicago in order to knock some sense into me, and I ended up getting a job as a grant writer for a day labor organizing center operating out of Humboldt Park. In fact, I still have a copy of that Grant Writing for Dummies book that I bought in order to train myself. The year all of this went down was 2008. And the world shifted for me once again pretty quickly after taking that job. Most of our grants dried up. And I remember one particularly brutal gathering put on by a foundation for all the human service nonprofits working on causes like ours. We then had to pivot very quickly to individual giving. And for me, all I knew was that events were a thing that people did to raise money. That too long didn't read is that was not a fun time. But it taught me a lot about how the nonprofit sector actually works and laid the foundation for why I am deeply in love with what we do on a daily basis here. It's also the job where I first discovered the importance of technology. The organization didn't have an active website or social media presence, and I had absolutely no database to work with. My first exposure to nonprofit databases was downloading what I think was a Microsoft Access system that had about a 364-page PDF manual. I quickly abandoned that project because of how overwhelming it was. And thank you. I see a bunch of comments here. Look at that. Megan, 1993, theater house manager. Caitlin, visitor services associate. Love these. Love these. Thank you for commenting, folks. Keep it up. So when I talk about foundations and addressing how we can set leaders like you, like Megan, Caitlin, Kiana, and Kathleen, and others, how can we set them up for success? It's because I've lived it. I've lived through that feeling of waking up in the middle of the night with sweat pouring out of me and wondering how I'm going to pay my bills for the next month. I've lived through struggling with volunteers who know technology and actually get in the way of successful project implementations. It's also why there is great potential and promise in what a foundation represents to the sector. I believe very strongly in the democratizing power of individual giving, but we need to set people up for success from the get-go. And investing in general operational support, infrastructure, and training for nonprofit professionals and supporting the costs of critical technology needed to run those basic operations are where I hope we hear more conversations from foundations in the immediate future. That's also why I'm excited to have our Director of Customer Support join us shortly, because Jessica Johnson also knows the struggles of community nonprofits and their needs. What I think will be really exciting is to also help leaders like you understand how a technology company thinks about the differences between getting started, getting going, and long-term support. And that's how I think foundations can shift their thinking as well. There's different phases and evolution stages in the nearly 2 million nonprofits that operate in the US today. And I know much of this also impacts and influences philanthropy beyond the borders of the US. AFP has chapters and connections in Mexico, Canada, and beyond. It's right over there. Thinking about what a nonprofit needs at the right stage of their journey is a very important but difficult thing to do. It's also why established support infrastructure from both foundations and technology companies, especially if things are tightly aligned, is critical toward long-term success of people working in our sector, as well as establishing a vision of change that can permeate throughout society itself. You know, just a regular Thursday. I'm excited to get into it, but I do want to remind folks about our special giveaway this month. So let's hear about that again.
During today's episode, one lucky live viewer will win a free registration for Shalia Phillips' ABCs of Grant Writing course, a $497 value. This dynamic course is tailor-made for beginner grant writers and nonprofit professionals. With user-friendly tools, you'll master the fundamentals of grant writing, enabling you to craft compelling proposals and secure essential funding for your organization. Comment during today's episode to be entered to win. A winner will be announced at the end of the show.